Picture a winter night before electricity. No streetlights, no screens, no light bulb to flick on. Just 15 hours of real darkness, night after night, for months. You probably assume your ancestors handled this the simple way, went to bed early out of boredom, slept straight through until dawn, and got up when the sun finally returned. That's the image most of us carry. It's also almost completely wrong. Most people assume a long winter night just meant one long, unbroken stretch of sleep, because what else would you do in the dark? That's not quite right, and the real answer is far stranger than that. For most of human history, sleeping straight through the night in one continuous block wasn't the normal pattern at all. People woke up in the middle of the night, regularly, on purpose, and it was so ordinary, nobody thought to write it down as unusual. What's strange isn't that they woke up. What's strange is that we don't. The person who uncovered this was a historian, not a sleep scientist. In the 1990s and early 2000s, Roger Ekirch, a historian at Virginia Tech, was combing through diaries, court depositions, medical texts, and literature from pre-industrial Britain and Europe, and kept running into the same two phrases, casually, over and over, in documents that had nothing to do with sleep science. First sleep. Second sleep. People described going to bed shortly after dark, waking naturally an hour or two after midnight, for a stretch historians now call the watch, and then drifting into a second sleep until morning. Ekirch eventually found more than 500 references to this pattern, published his findings in the American Historical Review in 2001, and later in his book, At Day's Close. It wasn't a rare habit, it was ordinary vocabulary, the way we'd casually say, before lunch or after dinner. Here's where it gets stranger. The documents don't describe that middle-of-the-night waking as a problem. They describe it as useful. People use the watch to pray, to talk quietly with a spouse, to tend the fire, to think through dreams they just had, sometimes simply to lie in the dark, in a calm, unhurried kind of wakefulness, before drifting back into second sleep. There was no anxiety attached to it, no reaching for a phone, no watching a clock tick toward an alarm. It was just an accepted second chapter of the night, built into how everyone understood sleep to work. But that's only half the story, and honestly, what comes next is even stranger, because it proves this wasn't just an old cultural habit. In the early 1990s, psychiatrist Thomas Ware at the National Institute of Mental Health ran an experiment that had nothing to do with history books. He took modern volunteers, people with no knowledge of Ekirch's research, and put them in a controlled setting with roughly 14 hours of darkness a night, the same length of night a pre-industrial winter would have forced on anyone without artificial light. Within weeks, without being told what to expect, their sleep spontaneously split into two distinct phases: a first sleep, a period of quiet, calm wakefulness in the middle of the night, and a second sleep, almost exactly matching what Ekirch had found scattered across centuries of old diaries. Their bodies rediscovered a pattern nobody had taught them, simply by giving them back the one thing modern life had quietly removed: real winter darkness. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. This pattern didn't fade away slowly over centuries as humanity evolved past it. It disappeared shockingly fast, within roughly 1 or 2 generations of the spread of artificial light, gaslighting in cities first, then electric light reaching further and further into ordinary homes in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Within that narrow window, the entire concept of first sleep and second sleep simply stopped being said out loud, stopped being written down, and eventually stopped being remembered at all. A sleep pattern that may have shaped human nights for the vast majority of our existence as a species was overwritten so completely that most people alive today have never even heard it existed, until a historian happened to notice the same two forgotten phrases turning up again and again in old paperwork nobody else was reading closely. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If something this fundamental to how your own body used to move through the dark could be erased within 2 generations by nothing more dramatic than a light bulb, and erased so thoroughly you'd have no way of knowing it ever happened, what else do you currently assume is simply natural about your own body that's actually just a side effect of whatever quietly changed around you before you were born? So here's what actually happened to your ancestors' winter nights. It wasn't that they were more disciplined, or simply exhausted enough to sleep straight through 14 hours of darkness out of sheer boredom. It wasn't that segmented sleep was some fragile cultural quirk, unique to one place or one century. It's that without artificial light, forcing the night into one compressed, unbroken block, the human body defaults to 2 chapters of sleep, with a quiet waking hour in between. A pattern real enough that modern volunteers rediscovered it on their own the moment they were given back a long enough night. Your ancestors weren't gritting their way through the dark, waiting for morning. They were living inside a different, quieter architecture of the night, one your own body might still remember, if you ever gave it a winter long and dark enough to ask.